I just have an actual show of hands, please? Has anyone here heard of COVID? Okay.
Rough.
Ben. Also, because we're completely agile, we were still writing our talk yesterday, so if I come and read from the screen for a moment, it's not because I don't love you, it's because I've forgotten what to say and I'm panicking. So I'm Fliss Bennee, and for the last 2 years, I've been advising the Welsh Government on science for COVID, attending SAGE, trying to do 6 impossible things before breakfast. And as you can see, I look very different pre-COVID. I've been in and out of data and digital in government for about 15 years now, working on open standards, complex data, helping the government to get the idea of user needs first, and really kind of entry-level stuff that it's really hard for big, complex organizations to get hold of. It's still going to take thousands of us working together constantly in lots of different places to make lasting changes. But in 2019, I took a role in the Welsh Government to come and do digital and data and help sort of change up the NHS in Wales. And I was about 5 months into that when suddenly COVID came over the horizon and bang, can you be a spare chief scientific advisor? And I kind of went, well, my science is computer programming and astrophysics. And they said, it's all right, we don't have very many people in Welsh Government, so we just do with what we can. There's a biologist, you're fine. And the reason I met Ben in the first place was because Cooney was working with the NHS in Wales.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben Dodd. I'm the co-founder of Cooney. I spend my time with the Flisses of this world, people that want to move fast, deliver quickly. I spend a lot of my time working with governments, with global energy and financial organizations. But what I'm really most proud of, over the last 10 years, we've built at Cooney this amazing group of 60 engineers and consultants. And it's really that crack team of people that we're going to be talking about today. They became the real first responders to this pandemic. They saw the challenge, they rode to it, they worked weekends. It was fantastic to see. And for my part, I bring my ever-growing list of ways not to create a light bulb, and a pretty good list of some of the ways that you can. I also spent a lot of my pandemic time developing a worrying photographic equipment addiction. So that's why on the conference website, there's an overly dramatic picture of me as I tried to learn self-portraits. And also, I think you can almost tell that I've tried to do a slightly misguided Steve Jobs thing and bring a whole tweed one outfit look to my entire life.
He's wearing the same outfit here as in the photo, by the way. I think it's the only one
I could have bought the hat.
Right.
Next.
So we're going to tell you a little bit about our story, how a small group of people in a small country in the middle of an emergency was able to share our data our way and make a difference. There's a lovely picture of all the middle super output areas in Wales. This is from a few weeks ago, so it doesn't break the official sensitive rules. But you can sort of see different hotspots that are starting to come up. We're going to try not to bore you with the maths or the R number, which I imagine you're all completely sick of by now. But I think probably there are some things that can be applied to your own situations or to clients and partners that you work with. And first off, we said a country the size of Wales. I say it's a small country, but I don't want you to forget that it's literally the size of Wales. And I'm fairly certain that that is the unofficial scientific unit for area. This is a piece of the Amazon. When we talk about deforestation, we usually talk about an area the size of Wales being deforested every little while. A68, of course, the famous iceberg, which is a quarter the size of Wales. So maybe we should think of Wales as being 4 icebergs. Kind of helps people put things into perspective. Wales actually has 5% of the population of the UK, but it's just less than a tenth of the size of the whole UK. 20,770 square kilometres, which the internet tells me is 14 million rugby pitches, the beautiful game. And we're the perfect size to be like a startup country, not because of the chip on our shoulder about England being bigger and having more money, but because we don't have the economic power or the size of other countries, we have to innovate a lot. And we tend to put a great deal more stock in the strength of our relationships. Of course, we know everyone. There's only 3.2 million of us. But when COVID came and we had to start giving science advice, I wanted to make sure that we could be open and transparent right from the beginning. So to try and explain as much as possible to as many people as possible, I asked ministers for permission to share all of our independent science evidence and advice with the public. We've got exciting live, absolutely rubbish design websites, but it just gives all the information. And at the heart of it all, that's what seems to have resonated with people. See, in Wales, we've talked about the good and the bad things that are happening. No fear, no favour, just trying to help people understand what it means for them. And I hope that's part of the reason that the trust in Welsh Government decisions and in our science advice has actually remained relatively high over the last 2 years. At the beginning, our data was a mess. It's not a lie. There was mostly all there, somewhere out in the system, going from A to B. But we'd never really tested how long it takes to get access to data sets under stress. And it was mad. We didn't have agreements in place to cover emergencies. We couldn't get what we needed in order to see what was happening. And I knew we needed to see how fast the infection was reproducing. In fact, from day one, I had my sole team member literally phoning around every single one of the intensive care units in our hospitals across the country over and over again to find out how many suspected people, how many people might have COVID in your ICU, just so I could get an idea of the exponential growth. So my minimum viable project was a spreadsheet and a phone and one guy. I knew the information was 3 weeks lag behind the edge of the pandemic. We didn't have any mass testing, so we tried to identify what information there might be that would get us a bit closer to the leading edge. And the only thing that held back the panic was all the offers of help that came in. I know there was lots of snake oil out there, but groups like Google and Facebook opening up their travel data was a huge help. People like King's College with the Zoe symptom tracker, just getting crowdsourced information, trying to find that and harness it back. The early volunteers really helped us. We were iterating our operational and our academic models daily. I spent all my time going from meeting to meeting, first on the phone, then on Zoom and Teams when Zoom was decided not to be secure enough for government. And all of my spreadsheets were going out of date literally as I was talking. So I had no spare time, I had no spare people, I had no space to think. And all of my life was spent interpreting data with ministers that I knew wasn't in date. I had to talk to ministers, NHS boards, first responders, and I couldn't do it on my own.
Sorry, I did that. So, from my perspective, I think really what this was a call to arms for Armakuni. It was that we need to leap, we need to respond, we need to do it incredibly quickly. But also the pandemic was just a version of what we as a community had already been trying to achieve. It was a reaction to a fundamental change in what our users wanted, what the environment was like around them. Sorry, I've lost my place, I think. But so this was going to be something that was going to have to happen more or less overnight. This wasn't something that we could do over 2 or 3 years with a transformation. It was going to be something that we had to do incredibly quickly. And it was really, we got to the position where we had everything that we want. We had an imperative that we had to deliver against. We had an amazing team. And we knew that we would have to do all the things that we as a community talk about. We were going to have that ability to deliver multiple times a day. We were going to have systems to sense and respond into the environment and make progress that way.
So I do think it helped that we didn't have time to do things what my organisation would usually call the right way. We didn't have time for a long tender. I still had to safeguard public money. Oh, don't touch the chest, Felicity. So I took out a contract through G-Cloud, so I knew my organisation that I chose already had the clearances and the security stuff sorted. But because we were in an emergency, we didn't have time to shoot ourselves in the foot by trying to spec up our needs or tell our supplier exactly what we wanted when the whole point was they were the specialists. So we just went straight into a partnership. And really, all I had to do was introduce Ben and the team to my team of volunteer scientists and say, OK, let's talk about what we need, make sure you're open, just try this new way and see if it helps. And that prepared both teams for this really intense period where agility was actually more of a necessity. And we got to be more of one team than two. We trusted each other's specialisms. Ben's gotten used to listening to me talk for far more of the time than I ought to. But, you know, the background of needs changed, but we were working together.
So the first thing that we got together was the team. So from an Armakuni perspective, we brought the data scientists, we brought the engineers. These are the types of people that could build prototypes in hours. Welsh Government also brought a vast array of people from medical, population, epidemiological, that's a word. All experts are working at that national scale. And the way that we worked is we sat side by side. We also brought the technical communication, so we were the experts in how to actually get this stuff built and out into the cloud, but that's no use if you can't communicate with everyone else in that team. There was none of this headphones on, heads down mentality, and we also brought that ways of working, so it's at the real core of how we work is that really fanatical view of what the customer is, what they need. We give them quirky names, we invent their pets, all of those things. Anything that we can do to, as we are working, delivering this stuff, we have a really vivid view of what that customer is.
I did not know that.
You didn't know we gave them all pets?
I didn't know I had a pet, nope.
Yeah. So actually at this point, we had everything that we needed to be successful. We had that mandate. We had a really high value, near impossible thing that we had to achieve. And we had this amazing cross-functional team of people who had the ability to actually work very closely together and had all of those superpowers.
Show them the thing.
So the thing. So this is the first version of the thing. And obviously the first rule of building a data dashboard is definitely do not build a data dashboard. The first version was a spreadsheet. It was built by, I think, the head of radiology in Wales, who was the person that happened to be walking past Fliss's office at the time and was roped in. Then from that point on, we built out this, we did it, the sort of early messy iterations of what the solution was going to look like. And it was a real, it's taken most of my career, I think, to learn that these need to be quite messy. They need to signal to the person that is looking at these that their time to contribute to how this is going to work and be delivered is now. It is not a shiny, polished thing that they are just to go rubber stamping. It is about them contributing. It was also a real balancing act. So thinking of the users that we had, ultimately we had one main user, which was the minister in Wales. So we were getting that very direct feedback from one person. But then also it was a broad community of people. It was the military, it was local authorities, all those sorts of things. So even as we were working at pace, we still took time to do focus groups and those sorts of things to get continuing insight from the people that were using this. And this is the tool. So the tool was trying to be a few things. It was trying to be an at-a-glance view of what the current state was. So you would see the colors, black being the worst, so people could see that at a glance. They would also see the freshness because the data was all updating at different times and at different paces. But it also gave you the ability for all of these sort of main areas that you could then drill into that data. You could zoom in, you could examine little peaks in minute detail. And that gave the usability to the different types of users. Some people just needed a PDF, evidence-based thing they could put in a briefcase. Some people were really trying to dig into the data and understand what was going on. We automated everything. So that was the data, the security, the deployments into production. All of that stuff was automated so that over time we were building trust. We were building trust that the data was going to be accurate. And historically, that had been one of the main things. As people were doing that manual work, it was extremely hard to be accurate.
Show the sperm one.
Show the what?
The tails all swimming so that I can see a week ago and now. Do that. Go forwards in the thinger.
Am I being hurried up? Is that always what is going on? Okay, fine.
You see, that's where they were a week ago, and then each of them has a little head so you can see which way they're all swimming. But originally we had equal parts green and yellow and orange. And then case numbers went way, way beyond what we thought was going to happen. So now it's just all red with my little sperm just swimming up here. Sorry.
I thought you said sperm.
I did, yeah. That's what they look like. I've described it that way to ministers.
Excellent. So in terms of the tool was built with a focus on the users first. So there were existing systems, there were existing networks that people could have been onboarded to, but really the onboarding time for those was weeks and months. So one of the big calls that we made was to build it open source, to use the public cloud, to allow them to get that access that they need, because it was a addressable market, that's a term. So there was obviously the ministers, but at the time, if you remember, the military was being onboarded into the effort. So all of a sudden, people in that world needed access to these systems. and using what was already deployed was never going to work in the time. So it was open source. There was a huge range of data. There was evidence about PPE stocks. There was genomics. Later on, we added insight from poo. And it was refreshing that we hadn't lost our humanity. And when we were talking about whether we could use wastewater as a leading indicator about emergent breakouts in the community, that we were still finding it very difficult not to...
We washed our hands of that quickly.
But that was good. Can I write that in? No, it's too late.
So, yeah, we got quite a long way in real-time data. We were starting to have time to actually go out to the public and explain things. And I was reminded that I'd moved too far away from what are the real user needs. So my comeuppance was a technical briefing for the media, the first one I'd done, and it was an off-the-record session where we took people behind, like, the science curtain. And there's me, I've got my whiteboard, I'm showing the R number, I'm showing how it's 1 at the top, but also 1 at the bottom, because it's a horizontal line is 1, that's what a ratio does. And, you know, I've got my behavioral science colleagues talking about protective behaviors, and someone said, all right, but you're talking about masking up. What's the point of saying that if there's no masks to buy and if some people can't afford them? And I was like, I have looked into this, and I can't sew, so I can't sew myself a mask, but it is literally possible to get like a 5 to 10 nanometer filter mask that fits you well with a sports sock and a piece of kitchen paper and a pair of scissors. And I had brought a sock because I'd showed my colleagues earlier in the day, so I showed these journalists. And then just after that, I got a press team said ITV and BBC had both asked for an official on-the-record interview. And I was like, yes, my first science thing. I said, do they want the whiteboard? Should I get some of the cool graphs? And they went, no, but can you bring the sock? And my very first live TV outing as a science advisor, 6 p.m. for ITV and 6:30 on the national news doing arts and crafts, like someone from Blue Peter. But it was exactly what my users needed. They needed a science advisor showing them that there were things that they could do to make themselves safer. And that was a big kind of, I've gotten too carried away moment. Anyway, so the next thing our users wanted was a solid, reasonable worst case specific for Wales. So the next thing I did was ask Armakuni if they could spin up a virtual supercomputer for my new models.
I think we're running slightly behind time, perhaps. So I'm not going to go into this in... Oh, we're good. Oh, okay, cool. So having been working day and night to just really get a grasp of what the current day looked like, what did the current data look like, what was actually going on, now all of a sudden it was, can you also tell us what the future holds? Which was a real education for me. I mean, we were generating these graphs, and they were really showing the end of humanity in lots of cases in the extreme sense. So having a working day that involved graphing that was certainly interesting for me.
Sorry.
But what was really happening here is, as a community was trying to understand what the best models were, the Welsh government placed multiple bets. So they had multiple teams that were looking at which models they could work, who could run them, what they would tell them about the Welsh context, because models existed, but often for the UK or for the world. So this was a bet that was placed with us to generate this data. The supercomputer that we used was Google Cloud. It was hundreds of nodes and thousands of cores. It wasn't a supercomputer, but it was something that we could scale up, and we built in a week to get those first results going through. It was also using all of the ways of working that we would normally use. So even though it was a model and relatively complex, the calibration had its own continuous integration pipeline. So as the upstream changes were happening with IBM and faculty and those sorts of people, we would automatically see whether that model would apply to Wales, and it wasn't huge amounts of work to refit it to the Welsh context. And also, it was a model that was then passed on to Swansea University to run. So because everything was automated, everything was in a single code base, the actual handover to Swansea University for them to run it into the future was something that took 2 meetings, I think, over the course of a week. It was incredibly straightforward. And the other thing that was really happening was that the community was responding exactly how we would want. So there were organizations which may have been a competitor to us or were certainly across national boundaries, but they were responding in that exact way you'd want, in that code was being shared, meetings were being set up, and these were meetings that were direct between the people doing the work. It wasn't via a proxy level where you would ask a question and then in 3 weeks later you might get an answer. This was teams coming together incredibly quickly, generating giving their time at nights and weekends and all those sorts of things. So that was really fantastic to see. So Fliss, the best bit. What did we do wrong? What could we have done better?
Definitely. So there were two things that I would say. One, I'm not going to say now because it's not relevant, but you, sir, who are actually making eye contact, I apologize for that. Can you remind me about ceilings at the end? And then I won't forget ceilings. Really, really good thing was how swiftly everyone got the hang of working with people who weren't in their organization. But honestly, if I'd had you guys actually in some more of the science meetings, just observing, then you would have been able to understand our needs even faster, and we probably would have had stuff, days, weeks earlier.
Yeah.
What would you do differently?
So I think one thing is lots of people had dashboards, I think, and there was lots of really great work going on in lots of silos, I guess, across the landscape. So one thing would have been to take it on the road more, to be doing more show and tells, to really trying to show people what value was in the thing that we created. A, because we wanted them to use it, but also we wanted them to be doing other things, other higher order things they could be doing. And I think the other thing is, in the middle period of creating this dashboard, having early on been really obsessed about creating MVPs and prototypes, things being messy so that people could get involved, once we've moved into that automating delivery process, we sort of moved away from that too much, and we really could have gone back. So some of the features that we tried to create should have gone back to that sort of no-code prototype phase, so we could have got even faster feedback. There were features which really turned out to be not that useful that I think we probably could have worked out earlier on.
They were probably my ones. Okay, that's my go. So what really made it work was our willingness to co-produce. We've talked about that already, but the trust we had in each other from the start meant that even though there were exceptional times, because we weren't supplier and customer, we could do partnership things. And I've been a terrible customer, and I'm sorry. No, literally. When Armakuni started working with us, I hadn't paid them. I hadn't worked out how to make finance work. More than once, our contract has lapsed because I've been unable to navigate finance at the same time as trying to navigate science. But Ben and the gang kept the service going while I sorted that out because it was important, and it was telling the story behind the data to literally help save lives, and because we were part of the same team. And they sort of turned around and went, "It's okay, we trust you, we know it'll happen." Also, we know where your government lives. Commercial director's still smiling. Hey. But the success and impact of what we built is as much to do with the actual digital experience as the way we operated. So we've had a paradigm shift in the way we work in science now, at least in Wales. We've seen real-world evidence of how much information into action comes when you get a lot of different specialists together. So this is our age and infection chart, which looks very kind of, dull, but if you say, okay, here's July 2021-ish, and you can see sort of a little bit of infection coming out, but we can look at this and we can say, look, here's September, here's when schools opened, and suddenly this 10 to 19 age starts getting infected, boom, and you can see that lightening of colour slowly showing that the children are getting it first, and then they're giving it to people in their 30s and 40s. And this is the first sign we have that the vaccine is really working well, because those people over 60, it's just not going in there like it did in the previous one, which is brilliant. And then over here, you can see Omicron coming out of nowhere, actually not so much in school children, but in those sort of younger people who are starting to go out. And then it's hitting all the people who haven't yet had their booster. And then that sort of drops down again, which is amazing. And that's just, this story. We iterated this data so many times. And we just kept telling a story and then doing regressions, seeing if it worked. And the funny thing is that that's not really a new idea. Everything about Agile for decades has been fast, multidisciplinary groups sharing things, and that's a good way to get stuff done. But the difference now is, even in the public sector, which I admit is slow to learn, at official level, at cabinet level, our senior decision makers have seen how good it is when we get to do stuff in an Agile way.
We've got 30 seconds left.
We've got 30 seconds left. Well, this is the last slide. Great. So what have we learned? We've shown you that you can be evidence-led and data-enabled in an emergency at speed. Yes. We've saved lives with maths in the driving seat, which is a definite aim for us. We blended agile, knowledge-based economy of science with a more process-based economy of public service and large organizations in general, getting results fast, moving our specialists up the value chain so they can concentrate on higher order problems like what's Felicity going to ask for next. And we really like working like this. So my question to all of you is, who's going to come next? Because if we can put our trust in external partners in the public sector, not blindly, not trying to outsource our accountability, but in open partnership, in the spirit of curiosity, then what other complex, massive enterprises can change and do this kind of thing? We've learned that uncertainty is not something to be feared, it's something to be explored. Because exploring uncertainty together brings us to understand ourselves and our organizations better, and being open about what we do and how we do it with our users and our partners and our consumers helps us to travel the same road to certainty. It builds trust. And trust lasts longer than contracts, and it lets us do amazing things. Thank you.